and the work you're doing here with Michigan Vaccine Choice is really, really fantastic. I'm inspired by what I've heard tonight, and I'm really inspired to hear these candidates. Nonprofit educational work is essential, but at the end of the day, is that better? At the end of the day, this is about politics. This is about the laws, and politics makes the laws. So let me add my voice that this PAC needs your financial support. There's incredible volunteer work that's being done. Joel Dorfman even picked me up at the airport and gave me a tour. But you know, there are resources that need to be used in any kind of effort like this. So I'm going to make short remarks, and what I really look forward to is a little question and answer, to hear what's on your mind and see if there's anything I can say that might be helpful. I've been in this world for a while now. I have a son who's vaccine injured, and he's going to be 21, and so I've been in this for, you know, close to 18 years. And you guys are doing it right. You know, you're organized, and you're publicizing the issue, and you're making it political, and you know, that's what's key. This is going to win because of the grassroots. Some things are better over the last 18 years, and some things are worse. So it's definitely better that we've got more people who are aware. I'm sure Sue will tell us that in, you know, the 1990s, when she started this, there probably weren't as many people around. More people are aware, and the conflict is becoming more overt. I think Lori and Rebecca's cases show us that that's a good thing. Other people get to see how flimsy the reasoning is on the other side. People have to see that. So conflict is not a bad thing here, but many things are worse, right? There is more suppression of the science. Other, you know, scientists can speak to that. There's suppression of doctors who want to do the right thing and really work based on informed consent. And there's more coercion, right? We see states like California give up informed consent, right? Mandates or leave the state. So some things are absolutely worse, but it's a dialectic, right? It's action and reaction. This is a David and Goliath struggle, and guess what? David wins in the end. We're going to win. You know, we're going to win. The truth is on our side. And just to echo what one of the candidates said, it reminds me sort of that you're doing everything wrong. So I went and testified in Maine for a colleague in Vaccine Choice in 2015. And we were before a joint committee of their Senate and their House in the state. And there were lots of people. It was about mandates and about, you know, what kind of, whether there needed to be a waiver and people had to go see a doctor. And we had, I don't know, maybe 30 people on our side. And pharma and the medical community, they, you know, maybe had about 30 people on their side too. And the chairman of the committee said, we're going to wait until every person gets their shot to speak. And at 5 p.m., all of the people from pharma and the medical establishments walked out in their suits, leaving all of us who really cared passionately about the issue. And that's the bottom line. We're here because we care about this, because we realize this is about our children's health. This is about our health. This is about the future. And I often think about the Greek myth about Cassandra for the work we do. We have the power of prophecy. We see the future, and nobody believes us. But the truth is, over time, you know, people do believe us. The numbers, the rate of injury from vaccines is just staggering. And the candidate that you just heard from, you know, she did her own vaxxed-unvaxxed study in her own family, right? The older kids were vaxxed and they were sick, and the younger kids were unvaxxed and they're incredibly healthy. So how do we win, right? How do we get from here to there? So I think we keep doing what we're doing. This is maybe, you know, maybe this isn't popular, but I honestly do believe we have to win more doctors over to our side. We cannot sort of give up on the docs. They're human beings too. They have kids too. And I'm very encouraged by some of the efforts to set up doctors groups. So there's a group out of California that's set up in the wake of SB 277, Physicians for Informed Consent. I think that's really important. There's a lot more doctors speaking out now than there were 15 years ago. We do have Dr. Brownstein, who I'm thrilled to meet, but Dr. Humphreys, Dr. Thomas, Dr. Moskowitz, Dr. Seneff, Dr. Lyons-Weiler, who's healed, Dr. Polevsky, Dr. Obuchanich. We have PhDs and MDs that we didn't have around 15 years ago. I think we have to work with the medical community. We have to keep educating them, frankly. And then it's going to come down to legal change, right? And I'm really encouraged by the work that you all are doing here. So what is that work around laws? Well, we have to protect and expand the exemptions. You're doing that. Ultimately, of course, we have to end state mandates. That can be done on the state level. It can be done on the federal level to sort of change the laws that disallow states to enact mandates. But we have to end mandates, and we have to repeal the 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which gives essentially blanket liability protection to doctors and to pharma for vaccines. If we could sue tomorrow, it would be a totally different landscape than we have. If we had the same protections for vaccines that we have for drugs, we would not be in the situation we're in today. We would not likely have the explosion of chronic conditions that we have for children. I think another thing we have to do to win is we have to think globally, and we have to act globally. We have to act locally, but we also have to think and act globally. Our opponents in this, pharma, if you will, and government, intergovernmental agencies, they are all global, right? They are absolutely, Merck is not just in the US, Merck is global, Pfizer is global, Glaxo is global, the World Health Organization is global, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is global. Those are the people, those are the institutions that are really driving the mandate craze, if you will. So I think we would do well to reach out, as many of us are, to our colleagues in other countries. I mean, there are people just like you and me in every country of the world, because they're up against exactly the same things we are. And so I'm just going to say in closing, I'm working now to finish a book about the human papillomavirus vaccine, which will be out in the fall. And I have to say, I do want to give a plug to Vaccine Epidemics. So this one, I was just looking at it. We sort of said in 2011 what was going to happen, and I think we called it right. You know, it was going to get worse before it gets better. But that parents like you and me really care about this right. And so the book I'm working on now, the human papillomavirus, it's called The Human Papillomavirus on Trial, Weighing the Evidence. It's really looking at this particular vaccine, and I honestly think there's more room to shed light with this vaccine than with a lot of the others. The vaccines that are given to children on the day of birth, at 2 months, at 4 months, at 6 months, at 12 months, or 15 months, you know, who's to say what that kid was going to be like? You know, who's to say that that wasn't genetic and that it was caused by the vaccine? It's tough, right? There's no baseline. The kid wasn't talking, the kid wasn't walking, the kid wasn't playing piano, the kid wasn't playing soccer. It's not the same with the human papillomavirus, right? These kids are 12, they're 13, they're 15. These kids play soccer, these kids are top of their class, these kids are totally verbal, these kids, you know, have lives. And suddenly, it's over. It's absolutely stopped in one way or another, whether through disabilities or through death in some of the most horrific cases. And so I'm hopeful that by really shining a spotlight on that vaccine, which is easier for people to get, that maybe we can really get more support. That who's going to, you know, if there's a risk, there has to be choice, right? If there's damage, who's going to take care of these kids? Is the state going to take care of these kids? You know, fat chance, right? It's going to be the families that have to take care. So it only makes sense economically and commonsensically, not to mention morally, that families and parents have those choices. So that's kind of what I wanted to say, and I'm really eager to have a discussion and hear what's on your mind, if that works.
Hi, Mary. Thank you for being here. Okay, so this is one of the really annoying things that happens. We have a constitutional right to a free and public education in Michigan. We have a statute that says parents have the natural and fundamental right to direct the care and education of their children. But your kid's in school, they're not vaccinated for chickenpox, One kid, the vaccinated kid, gets chickenpox, and then 50 unvaccinated kids in the school that would have no, contact with this one kid that had chickenpox, a couple days ago or whatever, get sent home for 21 days or more.
I have an idea.
So give us some ideas, because it's challenging. And it's not an outbreak,
So here's my idea. This just popped into my head, Carol, but here's my idea. Have the kid who has the chicken pox, have that kid have a party, invite all 50 unvaccinated kids, have those kids get chicken pox, and then they can go back to school. I mean, of course it's not an outbreak. Let me be honest though, in every state where we have religious exemptions, which thank God is still 47, in every state where we have a religious exemption, there are statutes that say that in the event of an outbreak, a kid who's not vaccinated who would potentially be susceptible has to be at home. I don't stand by that, but I think that one is very, very hard to change. It can be used abusively. You don't have a statute to that effect?
We have like a general statute that says the health department.
So Carol's saying that it's discretionary. So in New York, where I'm from, we have a statute that says in the event of an outbreak, the school can say the kid's home. And of course it can be used abusively. But I think that one's particularly difficult. But as Joel has already said, if those parents of the unvaccinated children can make the case that their children had subclinical chickenpox when they were 2, they don't have to go home. So, I mean, I think there's different ways to handle it. I'm not here. It depends on, it's all local, but those would be some thoughts.
The thought I wanted to mention is that if you do go and get the vaccine, you can go to school the next day. And there's no possibility that receiving the vaccine
Of course, as you're not immune.
created your immunity
Yeah, no.
immediately upon receiving it. So we know it's simply a form of coercion.
Oh, absolutely.
There's, again, no science.
Yeah. Well, even beyond that, there's viral shedding, right? The kid who has the chickenpox vaccine can actually literally transmit the disease to other kids. No, this is not about logic. I think we have to fight it based on logic. But this is not about logic. This is about coercion. And so I think in these circumstances, A, we try to change the law, right? But B, we make it work, right? So maybe those kids had subclinical chickenpox. Maybe there's a chickenpox party, the kid gets chickenpox, and they're in school the next week.
Hi Mary, how are you?
I'm good. Good to see you.
Good. So the question that I have for you, Mary, is you have this new book coming out. It's HPV Vaccines on Trial. Could you tell us a little bit more about it? Could you tell us who the readership, you and your co-authors, who the intended readership is, and why it's so important to this group?
Thank you for that setup, Dr. Lyons-Weiler. So Jack has been a generous reader and given us some really helpful comments. So I'm a co-author with Kim Mack-Rosenberg, who also was a co-author and editor for Vaccine Epidemic, and Eileen Iorio. And the three of us has really been working for several years, really doing a deep dive on this vaccine. And I think the reason it's, for me, been really eye-opening and I think valuable for us as a community is that we see, just like in certain drugs, so the drug that was on the market for Merck that made Gardasil, before the drug that sort of they had to take off the market was Vioxx. And the reason they had to take it off the market was because it was killing people. It killed over 100,000 people. And they knew it was going to kill people. In the clinical trials before the FDA approved it, it was obvious that it was going to affect people who had cardiac risks. And Merck went way out of its way to make sure those risk factors were not known. And the FDA didn't do its job, and the New England Journal of Medicine didn't do its job. It basically published false information, keeping that information, and over 100,000 people died. And a guy at the FDA said, this is the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of the FDA. And right after that, Merck brought Gardasil on the market. And what we see when we do the deep dive in the clinical trials for Gardasil is it's the same old, same old. Only the difference is we can't sue Merck directly. We have to go through this Byzantine legal process going to the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. But when you do a deep dive in the clinical trials for Gardasil and for its competitor, Cervarix, what you see is that there's manipulation, that there's tomfoolery, but that there's lies, that there's real efforts to create false impressions of effectiveness and safety that just don't exist. It's really an incredibly unsafe vaccine. And if you really look, I mean, they acknowledge in the package insert on Gardasil that it is reported to cause death. Death is in the product insert, it's the package insert. And there's one case, this is incredibly difficult, but after 8 years in the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which I'd be happy to talk about a little bit more, but it's the program you have to go to if you think your kid was injured by a vaccine. They found that it was, the plaintiff's family proved that her daughter, Emily Tarsell, proved to the satisfaction of this tribunal that her daughter's death was due to the Gardasil vaccine. And the Department of Justice, which is on the other side representing Health and Human Services, they did not appeal that case. They did not appeal that case because they would have lost on appeal. So that gives you some idea of, you know, the reality of this. This is not illusion. This is not, you know, and people don't suffer psychogenic deaths, right? So they like to say that the girls who say that they have fatigue, and boys too, that they have, that they're dizzy and that their heart's racing. The other side, if you will, says, oh, well, it's just psychogenic. They're making it up. Nobody makes up a death, right? That just doesn't happen. There's no such thing as psychogenic death. And there have been, you know, over 400 reported deaths from these vaccines in the US. There's thousands of reported deaths around the world, but there's now been a proven case from the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program.
So I'm just wondering what your opinion is on the 1986 Act and how it could be repealed. We already have the whistleblower, and everybody was trying to get Congress to, you know, to subpoena Dr. William Thompson. That didn't happen. What do you think it's going to take to have that act appealed? Because we have two potential Congress people here.
Yeah. All right, so for our Congress people, for the benefit of our Congress people, man, I can't tell you how many trips I've taken down to Washington to talk with the Government Oversight and Reform Committee, and to talk with my Congress people, and to talk to senators. And we have gotten so little. So let me tell you the story. Actually, let me say that. So I worked with others really hard. And we got a commitment from the chair of the committee, the House Committee on Government Oversight and Reform, to hold a hearing about the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which is a legal disaster zone from my perspective. And we made the optimistic idea, my colleagues and I, that we would have a briefing a week in advance of that hearing to attract staffers and Congress people to come to that hearing that had already been scheduled. The hearing had been scheduled. This is probably about 5 years ago. And as soon as we gave that briefing, and it was a really good briefing, Pharma and its friends got on the horn, and they got Immunization, you know, Action Coalition and everybody else to get all of their people riled up and write to their congresspeople, and the hearing was canceled. It had been scheduled, and the hearing was canceled. And then it's sort of like a booby prize, literally. The chair of the committee got us another Government Accounting Office report, which didn't go very far. It's really going to be hard. And I've talked to various lobbying organizations, you know, is this politically viable? And in today's world, they say no. But once we get a major lawsuit, or once we get some kind of major thing that's going to shine a light on this whole corrupt stratosphere, and it's going to happen, we don't know when or where it's going to be, then there's going to be political will to change this. The 86 Act is absolutely horrible. But I would love to hear from our congressman who seems to want to speak on this.
5 years ago, I was in the committee with Daryl Dice on Oversight and Government Reform. Vaguely remember something like that coming up, and then it didn't exist. And what happens, ladies and gentlemen, just so you know, is that's, excuse me, there you go. Okay. Where was that? Oh.
Daryl Issa.
Yeah, Daryl Dice. Congress members don't really determine what the hearings are going to be. That comes from the chairman of the committee and some lobbyists. But I will tell you, the pharma lobby is big money. People are getting more involved because they're waking up. The government wants to control you. They don't really want to take care of you. What's happening to the soldiers is also happening to the civilians, you folks. The establishment government, if you will, the government is telling you what's good for you and what you need to do. And what you need to do is question everything. I grew up in the 60s. We're kind of used to that. How many people? No, there's not many people here who grew up in the 60s. Okay, but anyway, we were taught to question everything. I believe, honestly, that, but I cannot prove it. I have a gut feeling. Like you mothers out there and fathers, you know, you have a feeling when something's not right, don't you? You know, when, even though you don't see your children, you know or have that feeling something's not quite right. You check, sure enough, mom knows, right? The same thing's going on. I get that feeling with what's going on with vaccines that our soldiers are getting, as well as our children. I honestly taught high school special ed for emotionally impaired children, as well as general education. I was the general ed teacher in a co-taught class where we had a special ed teacher. And I know what happens to those kids. When I was a teacher, I assumed that's the way it's supposed to be. Looking back on it, ladies and gentlemen, I have a hard time sleeping at night. If you knew what I knew, you wouldn't be sleeping. I know, that's why I want to go back. A lot of people ask me, why would you want to go back to that swamp? Yeah, well, there's a lot of injustice out there and a lot of stuff you don't know that I do. I don't want to seem arrogant or anything like that because I'm far from it. But it keeps me awake at night. And I just want to go back because I am angry. But I have to control that anger. And when I go back, you will be right there in the office. It's not a promise, it's not a pledge, it's a contract. Do we understand that? The difference, a contract? You do something, I do something. That's the way it works. God bless you for your work. Thank you.
Thank you. No worries. No, actually, you raise a really important point. I talked about the importance of getting doctors on board and that ultimately we have to change the laws. Let's get people, retired military on board. People in the military get this issue. They have been hugely over-vaccinated and they are suffering. People who actually served and their children who were sort of, getting a lot of stuff. I think retired people from the military are absolutely important allies for us in our work.
First, thank you. Secondly, you had mentioned, I think, Doctors Without Borders.
Physicians for Informed Consent.
Okay. And you also mentioned Bill and Melinda Gates.
Mm-hmm. In different categories.
No, I get that. So could you comment a little bit on the Gates Foundation, which everybody thinks is just this wonderful, beautiful, lovey-dovey, but no.
So I haven't done the deep dive yet on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which I'm looking forward to doing. Sorry?
Book 3?
Book 3, yeah, book 3. Yeah, I literally skipped book 3. But what I can tell you is that Bill and Melinda Gates has vaccines at their forefront. And I can tell you specifically in this HPV area that I've just done a deep dive on. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gave free HPV vaccines to a U.S. nonprofit, which then gave them to 2 provinces in India for what was supposed to be, they called it a demonstration project. But in fact, it was a clinical trial to see what were going to be the effects of these vaccines. And they were trying to sell them to the national government at the same time. And 7 girls died in those trials. And the Indian government had the good sense to say, we've had enough, thank you very much. We're going to have to change our clinical trial laws. And they did a parliamentary investigation and they skewered the pharmaceutical companies and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And now the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is disallowed from donating any money to Indian nonprofits around vaccines because their influence was so problematic. So in a lot of countries of the world, it has a really bad reputation. It's definitely one of the big donors in the Global Alliance for Vaccination and Immunization, Gavi, which is, these organizations are sort of considered public-private partnerships, but basically a lot of the steering is being done by the pharmaceutical industry. And so the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is working hand in glove with the pharmaceutical industry, and its executives have come from the pharmaceutical industry.
Thank you.
But the Physicians for Informed Consent is totally different, right? So that's been set up by pro-choice doctors out of California, and it's now got a national constituency of physicians and scientists and regular people like you and me who support informed consent. I mean, I have to say, first do no harm is the core responsibility of doctors. And doctors have to have prior, free, and informed consent from their patients. It's a very special relationship, and mandates absolutely destroy that relationship, right? If a doctor is serving a mandate, the doctor is serving the government, the doctor is not serving the patient. So we've got to undo this because, you know, it's destroying medicine aside from everything else.
I just wanted to comment on the Gates Foundation. I don't know if any of you saw a couple of years ago, there was some clickbait circulating around Facebook. There was a map from the Council on Foreign Relations. It was vaccine preventable outbreaks, and I put that in quotation marks. And I started digging into it because a family member who, you know, took it as an opportunity to attack me for not vaccinating my child. I started looking at it and looking into the data, and there was no consistency to the way they were plugging in the data. So I contacted the Council on Foreign Relations. Nobody could answer their data gathering methodology. I tried for 3 years. I had one employee. Sometimes when you call these organizations, you can get a nice somebody who just graduated from college and they're happy about their job and they tell you stuff they're not supposed to tell you. And one of them told me, well, if you'll call me after 5 o'clock on my cell phone, I might be, and I didn't take her up on it because I wanted everything above board, but I kept calling around, and there was all kinds of strange stuff going on. They would never defend it. So finally, because the Gates Foundation funded them, I went to their third party, I forget where I found it online, but you can find it. I reported it to them that these people weren't standing behind the science and they were funding it. Well, they never would actually admit that they funded it, but they went to Council on Foreign Relations and had them remove the Gates Foundation name from the website. So they went that far. But now that map, which they used as clickbait, even Michael Hiltzik from the LA Times, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning author, was using this data, and when I approached him and told him Council on Foreign Relations said he was calling it the toll of the anti-vaccination movement.
Yeah, we'll keep chasing him. I mean, I think where you said just keep chasing him. You know, the outbreaks, they go by vaccination status. You know, if we actually went by titer status, it'd be very different. And you know what, titers aren't 100% accurate either. Somebody can have a titer and they can still get sick. Somebody can not have a titer and not get sick. It's more complicated than that, you know, but that's not what reductionist thinking likes. Reductionist thinking is if your kid is vaccinated, they can go to school. If your kid isn't vaccinated, they can't go to school.
What about truth in advertising? Because we've got this ivaccinate.org.
Yeah, so the question is about truth in advertising. So I've looked at this with people before. We've never really found a good avenue. Remember, litigation costs money. You know, lawyers, this is expensive stuff. So, but people have been looking at that. I mean, I think we have to be opportunistic. We have to be looking at what are different ways to try to crack open the lid and get a little bit more light in this. It's hard because there's these mandates and these liability protections, but truth in advertising, racketeering, deprivation of informed consent, fraud, deceit. I think we have to be thinking creative, you know, custodial questions, experts. That was what happened in your cases is huge. It's really huge. That had never happened before. You guys are cutting edge. It may have been horribly unpleasant for you. I'm sure it was. And I'm sorry you had to go through it. But it was honestly what happened for you is a breakthrough. It is a breakthrough to actually have the vaccinating, you know, the pro-vax team have to actually take the stand and defend their views and produce the science. And guess what? Wasn't there. Wasn't there. So.
Lawsuit was filed by the whistleblowers for Merck related to the MMR in the month forging the antibody test.
Right.
And just recently in the last ASAP meeting, they approved a third MMR to be given in outbreaks. And what is taking so long with this trial, like I kind of read through the history of it a little bit.
Yeah.
And they gave all these dates that things had to be done by, all those dates went by. They gave more dates they had to be done by.
Yeah.
Now we have new dates.
Yeah.
Do you think that could be something that would be a breakthrough if they prove that they forged these antibodies and then added a third one for everybody?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So it was a question about federal litigation that's been ongoing now for several years about, it's being brought by two Merck scientist whistleblowers who allege that they were being asked to falsify data about the mumps component, about the effectiveness of the mumps component in the MMR vaccine. And Merck has a monopoly on the MMR. And yes, so litigation can go incredibly slowly, sad to say. This is not, don't get me wrong, I don't think, this is not a pipe dream. It's not a panacea. But that case is really important. Yes, when it finally comes out, when that case is finally over, and I don't believe that they're going to settle. I do believe that's going to go to a verdict in federal district court in Pennsylvania, and I've met the lawyers on that case. I do believe that's going to go to a verdict, and when that verdict, if it comes down, that they were being asked as corporate policy to falsify that, i.e. putting the whole, every cohort of children at risk for the mumps solely for the money, then that's going to be front page news. The New York Times isn't going to be happy about that, or the Washington Post, or the LA Times, that are not very friendly to our issue, but they're not going to have a choice.
Right, and we're having outbreaks of mumps.
Yeah, and there's outbreaks of mumps every 3 years. Oh, and they're all the people who are vaccinated. So in other words, the reality there matches the information that's going to come out of the case. So that is going to be a crack. That is going to be sunshine coming in. Oh my God, corporate policy was to tell these people to falsify this information, and kids are going to get sick. I mean, so that one's going to really make the vaccinating public think.
And add a third dose.
Yeah, and add a third dose. You're right. And add a third dose when there's pending litigation that moved past the motion to dismiss stage. In other words, the judge already said, these are plausible claims. These guys may have the truth on their side. I'm not going to shut down this case. Yeah.
Hello, thank you so much for your first book. My wife and I are anxiously awaiting your second. We are parents of an HPV injured daughter, Gardasil 9. I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are on that. Possibly, I really appreciate you saying it's going to shed a light on this vaccine injury. And mandating, I honestly believe this is going to be the vaccine that's probably going to take everything down.
I hope so.
In 1986, the law is all based on the greater good of children with these vaccines, and this current Gardasil vaccine is proving causing more damage than good. Is it possible to present a lawsuit with that argument that it's not the greater good?
Thank you. Well, one of the things so there are lawsuits around the world about this vaccine. There's a really serious class action lawsuit in Japan. There's a really serious class action lawsuit in Colombia. I recently met with lawyers in the European Union. Criminal cases have been brought in France and in Spain. So this is India. There's a case pending in the Indian Supreme Court, but in the US, I am really excited about a case called Roby versus Merck, which is in its initial stages of discovery right now, but it's in California State Court. And that was a case brought by a woman named Jennifer Roby and her parents. She got the first Gardasil. She got original Gardasil 8-10 years ago. She became horrifically ill. She took her case to the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which you have to do to be able to go out to another court. She lost there, as most cases do. But she has a great lawyer in California that I'm in close touch with, and she's sued for fraud, for deceit, for deprivation of informed consent, and for medical battery. And they've alleged that we would never have taken this vaccine if we understood what was in it, and if we had understood that Pap screening is a perfectly adequate alternative, that they didn't know a lot of things. And that case is moving forward. And I am I think there's some real possible traction there. I think that what happened in those clinical trials, there's information that's already out there that makes it very clear that at least young women outside the U.S., I don't know yet about inside, but it's very clear that they were lied to by physicians to recruit them to clinical trials. And they were told in black and white, you will get a saline solution, when in fact they were being given aluminum. They were given a neurotoxin without their knowledge or consent. So if that happened in the US, there's just no, that is like black and white. That is like a violation of every federal regulation about experimentation in human subjects. So I'm encouraged that there may be real, legal, viable claims in this area that may make a difference. But I'm really sorry for your daughter's injury, and I wish, yeah, I'm really sorry.
Hi, can you hear me? I want to introduce myself. My name is Lori Matheson, if you don't know who I am. I'm totally not taking this right now. I wanted to give an update, and I have a question for Mary Holland, but an update on my case is I've been fighting for 16 months for my now almost 3-year-old to not be vaccinated. She is completely vaccine-free right now. She's healthy. She's knows all of her letters, knows all of her numbers. She's thriving beyond any. I have 2 older kids. One was vaccinated in the hospital against my wishes. The other one was vaccinated until she was 8 months old, until I found out about the aborted fetal cells. And I actually want to mention something about that. I am a Christian, and I was on the news thanks to Rebecca Rijo for going to jail over this. They decided to bring attention to my case that had been going on for 9 months. Well, I mentioned in my stance I have autoimmune disease in my family, and also the abortions. I'm 100% pro-life. I boycott many things based on that one issue alone because of my Christian beliefs. When I did speak during my testimony, a Beaumont doctor actually came on the news after and said, you know, no, she's a wackadoodle, this is not true, I will testify to this, and this is not true, there are no aborted fetal cells used in the culturing of vaccines. Well, then we had the AAP president, which you may have seen. She admitted that yes, there are aborted fetal cells used in vaccines. So I just want to encourage everybody. I didn't really choose this. I was a mom that just was aware in 2006, and I thought this is absolutely not a choice for my family, for the autoimmune, for the abortions, for my religion. I want to encourage everybody, because also with my case, something that I think that needs to be known is an expert witness was brought on that was never viewed in the media, and that was Dr. Stanley Plotkin. And he is the inventor of the rubella vaccine. He actually handled the aborted fetal cells, actually participated in some of that, and he was deposed, and because of his deposition, he backed out of my case of testifying. And I wanted everybody to know that we are making a difference. Even though it doesn't feel like it sometimes, I'm on Facebook, I see the fighting, I see the back and forth, I see parents terrified about the herd immunity. They've been believing this forever and ever, and they don't want to admit that it's wrong, that people aren't telling us the truth. So I wanted to say all that to just bring encouragement that, you know, if this comes your way, or you have family, or you have somebody that you need to talk to, just stand up and do it. I had a Beaumont doctor, I don't know his name, I don't remember, but he was wrong, and he was on the news, and he was wrong, and we proved him wrong, and that felt great. So, anyway, it felt amazing. So, I wanted to ask Mary Holland that if a judge orders vaccines for a child that is not their child, is there a possibility to sue that judge if that child gets vaccine injured from said ordered vaccines?
That's really interesting. So it's in their power, and there are cases that have happened in U.S. legal history where a judge has ordered children to be vaccinated. But generally, judges don't want to take on that level of responsibility. And could you sue a judge if that judge ordered it? Yes, you could. You could bring an action against a judge for that decision, and that could then be heard by a different judge, and it could be appealed.
So with the workplace mandates at a lot of the health systems, if say you were mandated to get a flu shot and you were injured, obviously you have to go to vaccine court, whatever, but could you sue the health system? Are they immune? What's the story with that?
So I've looked at some of those cases. It's tough for hospitals to do that. Can they get away with it, and can they be immune? I think sometimes yes, but for instance, there's a really good case that went to the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, where the hospital had to pay the nurses, back pay of a couple $1 million, like six nurses who were terminated unjustly. They do still have to follow the state law on exemptions. It's sort of my sense of it, Carol. I'm not an expert on this, but I've read some of it. My sense of it has been a patchwork, right? Is that some of the mandates by individual institutions have definitely been upheld, no question. Sometimes they've actually been cut back, and in some cases they've been liable, in some cases they haven't. So I think on that one it's not really clear. It's interesting, I was asked to review an article by a legal author who was trying to advise hospitals on how to craft these mandates in the hospital, and there's a lot of boxes that they actually have to check. It's not that easy for hospitals to do that and do it correctly. So I think in general, I would advise people who are being forced to be vaccinated against their will, I would have them consult with lawyers, because there are likely grounds to sue. And it might even, at a minimum, it'll slow down the hospital. So I know that, in my in the NYU Medical School and in the hospital, they did put in this blanket mandate, and several people working there were terminated. And I know they've got an active case with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in New York, and I don't know where it's going to end up. I think if it were, I would be advising people in those circumstances to really evaluate their legal options, because they may have some.
Yeah.
So this is probably a very loaded question, kind of long-winded, so bear with me. I'm a pediatric ICU nurse, so I've seen lots of kids come in injured. One case that particularly stands out for me is the parents knew that their child was sick almost immediately after getting the MMR, but the doctors refused to put it in her medical chart, so then there's no legal recourse for that family to take it to vaccine court. And so, because there's so much deniability in the medical community, so sort of what I'm wondering is twofold. How do you try and educate doctors? Because you said that's something that we really need to work on, is educating the doctors. And then two, if the parents are adamant and it's kind of clear that there's a vaccine injury, is there something that I can do as a nurse to help educate the doctors to get it into the chart to help that family take recourse?
Yeah. Thank you. That's a really important question. So the ability of that family to allege vaccine injury in the injury compensation program does not depend on the doctor putting it in the chart. So they would have a right to bring a claim whether the doctor put it in the chart or not. Obviously, it would be really helpful to that family if it's in the chart and it says, MMR injury. One of the sad facts of the 1986 law that we've mentioned is it gives almost blanket immunity protection to the doctors. So if the doctors were following CDC guidelines when they it sounds like they probably didn't even administer this MMR, it was a different office. But those emergency room doctors are not liable. There's zero risk to those doctors of being sued for malpractice. In fact, I would say, if anything, that family might be in a position to sue the hospital, the emergency room, for malpractice for not diagnosing what it was. Those doctors in the hospital are not at risk of malpractice if they see a child and they say potential MMR. I know that there's a lot of censure and there's a lot of self-censorship in the medical community. I get that. But one of the facets of the 86 Act is if a doctor gives a vaccine which is known to be inherently dangerous and the child suffers ill effects, that doctor is not liable. The only time the doctor or the nurse is liable is if they have given that vaccine against CDC recommendations. So if it says, if the child has 103 fever, or if the child had had anaphylactic shock after the last dose of the same vaccine. I think, I don't know, obviously you have a job and you have a job to do, and I'm sure you're doing a lot of other great stuff. I mean, it was interesting. I was at I did a talk last week, and an emergency room nurse, a nurse from a labor room, said how frightened they were about various things going on in the labor room. And I would just say, talk to your colleagues, you know? I mean, this is all about sort of social activism. I mean, if you can, talk to your peers. You know, what do you think about that? Do you think that was really the right thing to do? You know, why do you think Dr. So-and-so is afraid to put that in the chart? And start the conversation. Obviously, we all have to make choices. You know, you don't want to put your own job on the line, and I get that, and I really respect families. You know, everybody has to make their own choices, but where you can, start the dialogue.
Thanks. I wanted to ask a question. I have a concern on the legal issues, and I don't know if you've had any experience in this particular situation, but what's going on now with doctors that are discharging patients because they disagree. I say I don't want to vaccinate my child, and suddenly, you know, and it hasn't happened to me, but it has happened to people I know that all of a sudden they get a letter from the doctor. Sorry, you're not a patient anymore. And I've been through this with my husband and some other, you know, health issues where we had issues where we disagreed with the standard of care, and then you get labeled the non-compliant patient, and then the doctor's like, well, you know, it's your fault, you're sick, you're not following our protocol. What is the legal recourse, and is there anything we can do legally to, or has there been anything going on to address that?
So actually, I was chatting with Dr. Brownstein, who you're, you know, fortunate to have in your midst before this, and we were saying that you know, pediatricians get paid bonuses by and their insurers if they have a certain level of compliance, like 95%. So it's financially advantageous for doctors to dismiss families, but they, you know, they cloak it in, well, you're a threat to the immunity of the children in my office, and I don't want you transmitting the measles and so on. I mean, from my perspective, that's certainly unethical, but I don't believe it's illegal. I think that's been looked at. We've you know, that is the stated policy of the American Academy of Pediatrics. I think in general, this whole notion of one-size-fits-all medicine, i.e. mandates, how ludicrous is that, right? We are all different. How could it possibly be that a baby with birth weight, you know, 3 pounds versus 10 pounds should get the same dose of the same vaccine? It's insane. And the same thing even with, to me, with standard of care. I was just caring for my parents in the hospital in the last 6 months. And, you know, the doctors were coming and saying, oh, well, this is the standard of care. You know, well, but this is my mother. You know, I want to give her, she should get what's right for her. And so I personally think they're related, this idea of mandates and standard of care, as if we're all widgets. We're not widgets, you know? We're incredibly diverse biologically. So I think we push back against that.